Welcome back as we discuss the Apocalypse of Zerubbabel. Yes, the Zerubbabel who rebuilt the walls after the exile, when he's allowed to return to Jerusalem. It is that Zerubbabel. And there's a number of reasons probably why this particular work was named after Zerubbabel after we get into some of the content that is contained therein. So what we're supposed to believe or understand from this text is that a Jewish leader sees a vision of the end times, the last days, the end of all things, and it involves a Messiah and an anti-Messiah, or as in the Christian context, people would call it anti-Christ, which is the same as an anti-Messiah. But the Zerubbabel was not only the rebuilder of walls, he was the governor of Judah after the Babylonian exile. And he was important for a number of reasons, one of those being the traditions that he caused or started for Judah. And so he is an important figure in his own right, along with Ezra and Nehemiah, in establishing the way that the Jewish people would be from that point forward, and the emphasis of the text and how they were going to respond to God and relate to God. Everything goes back to those moments after the Babylonian exile, and in fact, much of the scriptural understanding of what happens and the way that people began to interpret Scripture radically changed at that moment. It was no longer, Scripture was no longer the province of priests, but rather for people to hear at large. I think in Nehemiah chapter 8, there's the first real presentation of someone who is, in a sense, preaching to people, reading from the law, and the people are supposed to try to understand it the best they can, and there are people who are helping and all the rest. And so the Apocalypse of Zerubbabel is supposed to be looking forward to the end. And many of these pseudepigraphal works, it isn't that people were intentionally trying to fool you into thinking that Zerubbabel actually wrote this thing. People thought that it was an honoring thing to name something after, or to write in the pen name of some other important figure in history, especially in sacred history, and the reason is because they believed it honored them to do so. And so I don't have any other thoughts about that, other than that's probably what the author intended to do with this writing as well. This work was written sometime between the 7th and the 9th centuries CE or AD. So it's far after the destruction of the temple, but nonetheless it is a Jewish person who was left in the region because it's most likely written in Palestine at that time. Someone who still had hope in the future and what was going to happen, looking back at the temple and seeing the good old days, essentially, and the way that God could restore all things and rebuild the temple. And he's purported to be Zerubbabel, right, the previous governor of Judah after the Babylonian exile. In some sense, this is different than many of the other apocalyptic works that we've dealt with in this series, because it isn't necessarily a heavenly journey or something, but rather an angel who comes to mediate directly to Zerubbabel, so that he might actually understand what was going to happen. So this revelation of God is being revealed to Zerubbabel from an angel whose name is Metatron, by the way. Yes, Metatron. Sounds like a transformer or something like that, but nonetheless, the angel's name was Metatron, and it's the guiding figure for the book on how God's plan would unfold and what Zerubbabel was supposed to understand. But he isn't the only strange named individual that's in the text. We also have Armalus, who was the false Messiah who was going to come about, or the Antichrist who was going to come upon the scene. And he isn't just someone who is showing up to fool you as some angel of light like we would see maybe in many of the Christian traditions, but rather it's pointed out quite pointedly that he is a deformed individual, hideously so, in order that you might know that he did not originate here upon the earth, but that he's been deformed from the bowels of the earth in a demonic sense. And you're supposed to see that from the description of this creature. Armilus comes upon the scene and seeks to deceive the many. He tries to deceive anyone who would seek to be obedient to God, who's repented and turned to God, and in fact kills the actual Messiah, at least one of them. We'll talk about that in a second. But he kills Messiah ben Joseph. So Messiah, the son of Joseph. And you can see in that, I think, at least I do from a Christian perspective, the idea of the son of Joseph seems uncannily like the son of Joseph who would be Jesus, right, as Messiah. But I don't think that's his intent here, or maybe he meant to play it both ways. I'm not sure. But so Messiah ben Joseph is one of those figures, and he is the one who was said to do the suffering, which once again correlates with a messianic figure like Jesus. But he suffers on behalf of the people and for the people. And there's a second Messiah, and his name is Messiah ben David, the son of David, right? Now, coincidentally or not, Zerubbabel was said to be a descendant of David and a messianic figure in his own right anyway. And in a lot of ways, that's probably why this book was named the Apocalypse of Zerubbabel, because they saw him as such an important, integral figure for the furtherance of the Jewish faith and nation. But Messiah ben David ends up being the victorious Redeemer. So Ben Joseph suffers, and then Ben David is the Redeemer for all of humanity. Now, after the destruction of the temple, the only thing that the Jewish believers had in that sense was the text itself in the synagogues, where they could study the text and understand the text. Animal sacrifice was abolished because the temple was gone. And so what they had to fall upon was that which was started at the time of Zerubbabel and Nehemiah and Ezra, where there was a focus on the text of Scripture and on the obedience of the individual person, what you were supposed to do as a person of God and the way that you lived your life. The Messiah's mother, Hephzibah, was a sort of messianic figure almost in her own right, who goes about killing people, leading the military in battles. She was somewhat of an overdone Deborah from the text of the book of Judges. She is quite victorious and quite successful in what she does, and I think it's supposed to be that this symbolic of something, and there are a few arguments about what that may be and why she is a woman and whether it stands in for some symbolic meaning, one of those symbols of which I apparently do not understand or do not know. Eventually, Armilus is defeated, so therefore the temple can go about its rebuilding, but not quite yet. There's also the resurrection of the dead, those who are righteous. So Armilus is put down, those who are God's people are raised up, and Jerusalem is rebuilt along with the temple complex itself, in order that everything could be restored in the way that it's supposed to be, according to the Apocalypse of Zerubbabel. In the background the whole time, you're supposed to hold that the suffering that you have to undergo in the moment is due to part of the divine narrative and the way that God has constructed the world and the way that things will work out, because ultimately there's going to be divine justice, but guess what? Sometimes that means martyrdom, sometimes that means death, and it's all part of God's plan and part of divine justice in particular. And I think some of this is shaped probably then by the persecution that many were feeling by this point in Palestine. So sometime between the 7th and 9th century, which means Islam had become a fixture in the area by this point. And they were conquering the region, and there was not much of Jewish control in the area. And so you can see that they are essentially a minority viewpoint in that region. That also leads me to think about the way that there's a bit of borrowing in this text from various other texts and religions, especially at that time. And so the idea of a dual Messiah, for instance, lines up more with Islamic eschatology than it does Jewish or Christian theology. The eschatology for Islam has both Muhammad and Jesus being present in the end, one declaring to the other about what they need to do next, etc. And I think that fits that theme better. And it may be that the author was a Jewish seeker, but he also had already been influenced by Islamic eschatology that was present in the culture or the region at that time. Regardless, the notion of messianic hope is ubiquitous. It is everywhere, it is throughout time, and even a Jewish author 700 to 900 years after Jesus and after the destruction of the temple, after the diaspora of the Jewish people, still has a longing for a messianic hope. So this idea of a messianic hope is still present today within Christianity and within Judaism, and in fact also within Islam, although there are some differences, but nevertheless a messianic hope. And so as far back as we can look in time, there's always been a longing for God to send someone to rescue us from this mess. We see this in the period of the Judges, for instance. Within the Hebrew Bible, every time they're in a bad way, they call out to God, and God has to send a Messiah. He has to send a Messiah to help them, to free them from their troubles. Cyrus, whenever he's going to send the Jewish people back to Jerusalem to rebuild Jerusalem, Isaiah calls him a Messiah. He is God's Messiah at that moment to send his people back. There's always this view of that God is going to send or has sent and is in the process of doing something messianic. He's doing something in the world. He's acting in that way, and it seems to penetrate through all different times and various different cultures that have been present in those regions, and in fact to this moment even today. So when we look at these apocalyptic visions and the apocalyptic literature, we see that throughout, that there is a longing for God to deal with the trouble and the problems of the world, and everyone is looking for a way that that could be fixed. That's why this literature is important, and that's why the book of Revelation is important within Scripture, within the Bible, because it wraps up very neatly at the end of the Bible a way of God finally and fully coming full circle to fix all of the loose ends that have been left undone, even though people have come to know Him in the interim. So we're going to continue on this journey and looking at more apocalyptic books. So stay with me. If you liked what you heard, hit the like or subscribe button, drop a comment below. Hope to see you guys next time.